The Silent Echo. The planet of war was a barren, unforgiving world. Once a thriving hub of intergalactic civilizations, it was now a wasteland, scarred by countless battles. Its sky was a dull gray, with clouds that never seemed to move. The ground was cracked and dry, littered with the remnants of ancient wars, burnt-out vehicles, shattered weapons, and the bones of fallen soldiers. No one came to this planet unless they had no choice. It was a place where only the strongest survived, and even they didn't last long. In the midst of this desolate landscape, a lone figure trudged through the dirt. She was young, no older than 20, but the weight of her journey made her seem much older. Her name was Lyra, a soldier from a distant world, stranded after a mission gone horribly wrong. Her ship had been shot down by enemy forces, and now she was the only survivor, lost and alone on this deadly planet. She had been walking for hours, her feet dragging through the dust, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of life. But all she could see were the ruins of old cities, once vibrant and full of people, now nothing but empty shells. Her supplies were running low, and she had only a few rations left. She needed shelter, she needed food, and most of all, she needed a way off this cursed planet. But for now, all she could do was keep moving. As the sun began to set, casting an eerie orange glow over the land, Lyra noticed something strange in the distance. There, half buried in the sand, was a large metal object. It looked old, older than anything she had seen on this planet, and it seemed out of place. She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether it was worth investigating, but something inside her told her to go. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was the answer she had been looking for. With a deep breath, she started walking toward the object. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of decay and ash. She could hear the faint rustling of sand as it blew across the ground. The object grew larger as she approached, revealing more of its shape. It was a massive metallic structure, its surface pitted and scarred by time. It resembled some kind of ancient war machine, a relic of a forgotten age. The markings on the surface were worn and unreadable, but Lyra could tell it was something important. Her heart raced as she reached out and touched the metal. The cold surface sent a shiver down her spine. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the object, unsure of what to do next. Then, without warning, a strange noise echoed through the air, a low guttural hum, like the sound of an engine coming to life after centuries of silence. Lyra's eyes widened in shock. She pulled her hand back as if burned, but the hum only grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath her feet. "What's happening?" she whispered to herself, her breath shallow with fear and curiosity. The ground trembled beneath her, and she stumbled back, her pulse quickening. The humming continued, growing louder, until it felt as though the very planet itself was waking up. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still, as if the world was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the object suddenly shifted. A panel on the side of the machine began to rise slowly, revealing a dark, hollow space inside. The hum faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Lyra stood frozen, staring at the opening. Something inside her urged her to step forward, but another part of her screamed to run. She couldn't explain it, but she felt drawn to it. It was as if the machine had been waiting for her, as if it had been calling her all along. With a deep breath, Lyra made her decision. She stepped forward, her boots crunching on the dry earth as she approached the opening. The inside of the machine was pitch black, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw something glinting in the darkness. It was a control panel, sleek and sophisticated, far more advanced than anything she had seen on this planet. There were buttons and switches, each one glowing faintly, as if waiting to be activated. Lyra hesitated. What was this machine? Who had built it? And why was it here, hidden beneath the surface of the planet? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. It was important, and she needed to find out why. As she reached out to touch the control panel, a cold wind swept through the opening, extinguishing the faint glow of the lights. The silence grew thicker, almost suffocating. Lyra's instincts screamed at her to leave, but it was too late. Before she could pull her hand back, a sharp metallic sound echoed through the air. The panel before her flickered to life, and a low voice, ancient and distorted, crackled from the speakers. "Who dares awaken me?" The voice boomed, sending a chill down Lyra's spine. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The voice was not human. It was something else, something alien. And it wasn't just speaking to her. It was speaking through her. Lyra's heart raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Was she hallucinating? Or had she just stumbled upon something far more dangerous than she could ever imagine? The voice spoke again, its tone both commanding and ancient. "I have waited for you." Lyra's mind raced, the words echoing in her ears. "For me," she whispered. But before she could ask anything further, the machine's hum returned, louder and more intense than ever before. And in that moment, she realized that her survival on this planet might be linked to something far greater than she had ever imagined. Something was awakening, something powerful, and it was up to her to uncover its secrets before it was too late. The ground beneath her feet shook once more, and the silence was shattered by a distant roar. Far off in the horizon, she could see something moving, something large, something alive. It was coming for her. The forgotten legacy. The distant rumble of the approaching threat echoed through the barren landscape. Lyra could feel the tremor beneath her boots as the ground vibrated with the approaching force. But her mind was consumed by the machine, by the alien voice that had spoken to her. It felt as though her entire existence had shifted, as if the planet itself had chosen her for something, though she couldn't fathom what. She had to know more. The machine, this ancient relic, held answers, but it also held dangers she couldn't yet understand. With a final glance over her shoulder at the shadowy figures growing closer on the horizon, Lyra steeled herself and stepped deeper into the machine. The flickering lights in the control panel cast an eerie glow on her face as she moved closer, her hand hovering just above the buttons. The voice had warned her. "I have waited. For you." The words gnawed at her thoughts. But what could they mean? And why had it chosen her? She took a deep breath and pressed one of the buttons. The machine responded with a low mechanical hiss, and the entire structure seemed to come alive. The air inside the chamber shifted, cooling and becoming charged with a strange energy. The walls, once rusted and decayed, began to hum with life. Panels shifted and moved, revealing new sections, old compartments opening to reveal devices Lyra had never seen before, alien technology beyond her understanding. She felt a strange pull toward one of the devices, an artifact shaped like a crystal. It glowed faintly in the darkness, its light shifting and pulsing as if it had a life of its own. Lyra reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed the surface of the crystal. The moment her hand touched it, a jolt of energy surged through her, and a vision flashed before her eyes. It was a memory, not her own, but someone else's. A figure, tall and imposing, stood in front of a massive battle formation. The world around them was burning. Ships exploded in the sky, and the ground cracked beneath the weight of heavy artillery. The figure, was it a soldier? A leader? Looked to the sky, eyes filled with determination. They spoke words in a language Lyra didn't understand, but the power in their voice resonated deep within her chest. Then, the vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Lyra breathless and disoriented. She staggered back from the crystal, blinking as reality returned to her. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Her heart raced. What had she just seen? And why had it been shown to her? As she stood there, trying to make sense of the vision, the voice returned, this time softer, almost sorrowful. "You have seen what was, and what is to come." Lyra's mind raced. The machine, it wasn't just a war machine. It was a vault of knowledge, a remnant of a long-lost civilization. Who were they? She thought. Why was this all hidden here, beneath the planet's surface? With renewed determination, she stepped forward, scanning the control panel for more clues. Another button caught her eye, this one surrounded by intricate markings she couldn't decipher. The symbols glowed faintly, almost as if urging her to press it. She hesitated but then pushed it anyway. A deep rumbling sound filled the chamber as the walls began to shift again. The ceiling opened, revealing a shaft that led down into the darkness below. The air was thick with the smell of old metal, and something else, something ancient, like dust left undisturbed for centuries. A door at the far side of the room slid open, revealing a narrow passageway that descended into the unknown. Lyra felt the weight of the moment. She was no longer just a stranded soldier. She was now part of something much larger, something ancient, and perhaps something dangerous. But she couldn't turn back now. The voice had chosen her. The machine had awakened for a reason. With no more hesitation, Lyra made her way down the passage. The walls around her glowed faintly, and the deeper she went, the more the air seemed to hum with energy. It was as if she were walking through the heart of a dormant beast, a place where the very core of the planet held its breath. The passage seemed endless, twisting and turning, until finally she reached the end. What she found there took her breath away. A vast chamber stretched before her, its walls lined with more of the glowing crystals she had seen earlier. In the center of the room stood a towering structure, a monument of sorts, made of smooth black stone. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, a perfect fusion of organic and mechanical elements. At the base of the monument, a circular platform rested, and on it lay something covered in a dark cloth. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the platform. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. Whatever was beneath that cloth, it was important. It had to be. Slowly, she reached out and pulled the cloth away. What lay beneath was a suit, an armored exoskeleton, built for war. It was unlike any technology Lyra had ever seen. Sleek, black, and nearly indestructible, the armor was covered in intricate designs, symbols, and markings that pulsed with a faint otherworldly light. At the center of the suit was a crystal embedded in the chest plate, glowing with the same eerie light as the crystals she had seen earlier. It seemed to hum with a strange energy, as though it were alive, waiting to be awakened. Lyra's hands shook as she traced the outlines of the suit. The moment her fingers touched the crystal, a surge of power ran through her. Images flashed before her eyes again. Images of an army marching across distant planets, of battles fought with impossible weapons, of a civilization that had once ruled the stars. She saw faces, alien, humanoid, and others that she couldn't even begin to understand. And at the center of it all was the suit, an artifact of immense power, lost to time, waiting for the right person to wield it. She didn't know what it all meant, but one thing was certain. This suit, this relic, was the key to everything. The power it held could change the fate of this planet, and possibly even the galaxy. As she stood there, hands on the suit, she felt a new surge of purpose. She was no longer just a soldier trying to survive. She had been chosen to uncover the secrets of this forgotten legacy, to awaken the forces of an ancient civilization, and to confront the enemies that threatened her world. Outside, the roar of distant machines grew louder, signaling the approach of her enemies. But Lyra wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. The legacy had found its heir, and the war was just beginning. The warlord's forces. The skies of the planet were darkening, a blood-red sun sinking beneath the horizon. Lyra could feel the tension in the air. Something had changed. The echoes of the ancient machine, the voice, the suit. It all weighed heavily on her, but there was no time to dwell on it. The ground trembled again. This time, it wasn't just the planet shifting. It was something far more dangerous, something alive and purposeful. She quickly climbed back up through the shaft, the ancient corridors silent and oppressive, but the feeling of being watched never left her. As she emerged from the machine's belly, the dark landscape greeted her once more, but it wasn't as empty as before. In the distance, moving across the cracked plains, she saw them. A vast army, a mechanical behemoth that covered the horizon. It wasn't just a group of soldiers. It was an invasion force. Tanks, warships, and legions of heavily armored soldiers marched in perfect, terrifying unison, their dark silhouettes casting long shadows over the dead landscape. The warlord's forces had arrived. Lyra's heart raced as she quickly ducked behind a ruined wall, trying to make herself invisible in the deepening twilight. She had no weapons, no allies, and no plan. Her only advantage was the ancient machine's suit, but she couldn't yet control it. The crystal still hummed within it, pulsing with energy, but the power it contained was something she didn't fully understand. For now, it was a mystery. But the warlord and his army weren't. The warlord was known across the galaxy, a ruthless conqueror who had claimed this planet as his domain. His name was Chrysos, a being with an unquenchable thirst for power and an army that never stopped marching. His forces were made up of mercenaries, warlords, and mindless drones, creatures altered for war, machines designed for destruction. He had wiped out entire civilizations and was now hunting for Lyra, unaware of her newfound power. But that wouldn't last long. She had no illusions about what would happen if he found her. From her hiding spot, Lyra could see the first of his soldiers, a tall, armored figure, approaching. The soldier's movements were precise, mechanical, like a machine built for only one purpose: to kill. He held a large rifle, scanning the area with cold, calculating eyes. Lyra held her breath, praying he wouldn't notice her. The soldier walked past, oblivious, his boots crunching on the dry ground. But Lyra knew that wouldn't last. Chrysos' forces were too many. If she stayed here, hiding, she would be caught eventually. She had to act. Her fingers brushed against the metallic suit once more, and her pulse quickened. The voice inside the machine had spoken of a legacy, of an ancient war machine. Maybe, just maybe, this was her weapon. But she needed to learn how to use it, and quickly. With trembling hands, she activated the crystal at the chest plate's center. The air around her seemed to thrum with power. The suit's metallic plates shifted slightly, adjusting to her body. But it didn't come to life the way she had hoped. Instead, it felt like the suit was waiting for something, as if it needed her to prove her worth. Lyra gritted her teeth. What did I have to do to awaken it? Suddenly, a loud explosion shattered the silence in the distance. A building was obliterated, sending dust and debris flying. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The warlord's forces had started their assault. They were getting closer. A voice crackled through her comms. A message she hadn't realized was activated. It was faint, distorted, but familiar. Lyra, do you hear me? The voice belonged to an old friend, a comrade from her homeworld. Captain Rax, the leader of her mission. Lyra, this is Rax. You need to get out of there. The warlord's forces are on the move. We're coming to extract you, but you need to stay alive. Don't engage unless you're ready. Do you copy? Lyra's heart sank. The team she had been part of was gone. Every last one of them wiped out when their ship was shot down. She was alone now. Alone, and yet, not entirely. She had the suit. She had the legacy of a long-forgotten race. It was hers to command, if only she could learn how. And there was no time to waste. She turned to face the incoming storm of war. The forces were drawing closer, more soldiers, more machines, each one advancing with a single cold purpose: to find her, capture her, and crush any resistance. But Lyra was ready for them. In the distance, the leader of the advancing force appeared. Chrysos. He was a towering figure, draped in black armor with gold trim, his eyes hidden behind a helmet of polished chrome. He rode atop a massive war machine, a hulking beast that could level entire cities. He was watching the battlefield from his high perch, directing his forces with a single gesture, moving like a conductor guiding an orchestra of death. Lyra had to move fast. She couldn't let him find her. The suit, she needed to unlock its full potential. Her fingers brushed the control panel once again. And this time, something different happened. The crystal at the chest plate flared with a blinding light. The suit hummed as it adjusted to her movements, as though it were alive. A moment of intense pain gripped her body as the suit's neural interface linked to her mind. She felt every circuit, every power conduit, pulse through her veins. The suit responded like a living thing, reacting to her thoughts, her desires. She could feel the weapons, the power, the strength coursing through her. It was as if she were no longer just Lyra, the soldier. She was something more, something ancient, something formidable. Without thinking, she leaped from her hiding place, sprinting toward the battlefield. The suit responded instinctively, enhancing her every movement, making her faster, stronger, more agile than she had ever been. As she ran, the world around her seemed to slow, the hum of the suit becoming a low growl as she picked up speed. Chrysos' forces saw her then. They turned, surprised, but before they could react, Lyra was on them. The first soldier she encountered didn't have a chance. Lyra moved with speed and precision, her movements too fast for him to track. She grabbed his rifle, twisting it out of his hands, then launched herself at him with the force of a battering ram. The soldier flew backward, his body slamming into a nearby wall with a sickening crunch. More soldiers came at her, but the suit gave her an edge they couldn't match. She ducked, rolled, and weaved through their attacks, her body moving with unnatural speed and power. She struck back with deadly accuracy. One punch, and a soldier crumpled. A kick sent another flying. It was all instinct now. But then Chrysos' voice echoed over the battlefield, cold and commanding. "Stop her. She is the one we've been searching for." The forces hesitated, then surged forward with a new sense of purpose. The battle had shifted. Lyra had just made herself a target, and Chrysos would not stop until she was captured. But she wasn't going to stop either. The war had begun, and this time she was the one in control. The power of allies. Lyra had never felt power like this before. The suit was more than just armor. It was a part of her now, an extension of her body and mind. Every movement was fluid, seamless, as if the suit anticipated her every thought, every instinct. It heightened her senses, sharpened her reflexes, and filled her with a sense of invincibility. She had taken down a dozen of Chrysos' soldiers in mere minutes, her body moving faster than she ever could have imagined. It was exhilarating, yet terrifying. She was no longer just Lyra, the stranded soldier. She had become something far greater, something ancient, powerful, and possibly dangerous. But even with all this newfound strength, Lyra knew she couldn't do it alone. The warlord's forces were too numerous, too relentless. She needed allies. As the last of Chrysos' soldiers fell to the ground, Lyra took a moment to catch her breath, scanning the battlefield for any signs of movement. The once imposing line of the warlord's forces was now in chaos, soldiers scattered, their formation broken. But the danger wasn't over. She could hear the sound of more soldiers approaching, the unmistakable hum of war machines in the distance. Chrysos was regrouping, and soon he would send a much larger force to wipe her out. Lyra glanced around, her mind racing. The rebels, she had heard rumors of them, a small group of freedom fighters who had been hiding in the ruins of the old cities, opposing the warlord's rule. They were her best chance for survival. If she could find them, she could build an alliance, combine their strength with the power of the ancient suit, and perhaps, just perhaps, they could turn the tide of the war. But where were they? The battlefield had been devoid of any signs of resistance. The warlord's forces had been too overwhelming, crushing any hope of a rebellion in this region. But Lyra knew she couldn't give up. The whispers of the rebels had reached her ears before the crash. They were out there somewhere. She just had to find them. She turned and began to move, her enhanced agility allowing her to cover ground quickly. She ran through the ruins, leaping over debris, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The city was still and lifeless, the air thick with dust, and the smell of death. It had been a thriving hub of civilization once, But now it was just another casualty of the warlord's conquest. But somewhere in this vast, lifeless expanse, there was hope. As she pushed deeper into the ruins, Lyra heard a sound, a faint, rhythmic thumping, followed by the sound of metal scraping against stone. Her heart skipped a beat. It was the unmistakable sound of machinery, and it was close. She dropped to a crouch, instinctively blending into the shadows, her enhanced senses alert. The sound grew louder, and then she saw them. A small group of rebels, their faces hidden beneath hoods, moved cautiously through the streets, their weapons drawn. They were a diverse group, human, alien, and cyborg alike, each one bearing the marks of a survivor. The weapons they carried were crude compared to the advanced technology of the warlord's forces, but they were skilled, their movements synchronized as they advanced through the ruins. Lyra's eyes narrowed. There were only 5 of them, but they moved with purpose, clearly on a mission. She knew this was her chance. She couldn't waste it. Without hesitation, she stepped into the open, her figure silhouetted against the dusty sky. "Wait," she called out, her voice carrying across the ruins. The rebels froze, their weapons instantly aimed in her direction, eyes wide with suspicion and fear. But Lyra didn't flinch. She raised her hand slowly, showing she meant no harm. "I'm not your enemy," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I'm here to help." The leader of the group, a tall, muscular man with a cybernetic arm, stepped forward, his gun still trained on her. "Help," he sneered. "What makes you think we need help? And why should we trust you?" Lyra could see the distrust in his eyes. She didn't blame him. She was a stranger, a lone soldier, and these rebels had likely seen their fair share of betrayal. But she had no choice. She couldn't afford to waste time convincing them one by one. "I know about Chrysos. I know what he's doing to this planet," she said, her eyes locking onto the man's. "And I know there's more to the planet than you realize. I've found something. Something powerful. It's the key to defeating him." The rebel leader's eyes narrowed, his expression guarded. "Something powerful. You think we're going to risk our lives for some unknown technology?" Lyra didn't flinch. "It's not just technology. It's an ancient weapon, one that can turn the tide of this war, and I can help you use it, but only if we work together." The group looked at each other, exchanging silent glances. They were debating, weighing the risks. The silence stretched on, thick with tension. Finally, the rebel leader lowered his weapon, but his eyes were still skeptical. "You've got one chance," he said, his voice low and gruff. "Prove it. Show us what you've got." Lyra didn't hesitate. She activated the suit's interface once more, the crystal at the chest plate glowing as the power surged through her. The rebel group watched in awe as Lyra's movements became fluid, enhanced by the suit. She demonstrated its capabilities, darting through the ruins with speed and precision, her strikes and movements a blur. She took out targets with the efficiency of a seasoned soldier, each action a testament to the suit's power. When she finished, the group stood in stunned silence. That's impossible," the rebel leader muttered. "How is this even possible?" Lyra stood tall, her eyes meeting his. "It's a gift, an ancient legacy, and I believe it can help us take down Chrysos. But we need to move quickly. His forces are already mobilizing. If we don't strike soon, we'll lose everything." The rebels exchanged another round of glances, and then, one by one, they lowered their weapons and nodded. They had seen enough. "We'll join you," the leader said, his voice firm. "But understand this. We trust you, but only because you showed us the power of that suit. If you turn on us, we'll deal with you the same way we deal with Chrysos." Lyra nodded in agreement. She understood. They weren't just joining her out of loyalty or trust. They were joining her because they had no other choice. Together, they would take on the warlord's forces and perhaps reclaim their planet. The group of rebels, now united under a common cause, set off into the night, ready to prepare for the war ahead. Lyra felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. The battle for the planet was about to begin, and with her new allies, they would stand against the warlord and his army. And this time, they would fight for something more than survival. They would fight for freedom, the heart of the enemy. The wind howled through the broken ruins, swirling dust and debris into the air as Lyra and the rebels made their way deeper into the heart of the warlord's territory. The planet was scared, its once proud cities reduced to rubble, vast stretches of land left barren and empty. Yet in the midst of all the destruction, something remained. Hope. It was a flicker, but it was real. The rebels had joined her, their hearts filled with the fire of resistance, ready to face the warlord's overwhelming power. But Lyra knew that the real battle hadn't even begun. As they marched toward the warlord's central stronghold, a massive fortress looming in the distance, Lyra could feel the weight of the mission on her shoulders. She had never been part of a rebellion. She had always been a soldier, an individual sent to complete a mission, no matter the cost. But this was different. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting for a future where the people of this planet could be free. The rebel leader, Kale, had briefed her on their plan. It was a simple one, but a dangerous one. They would infiltrate the stronghold, find Chrysos, and destroy the central command hub where his forces were coordinated. Without that, the warlord's army would be disoriented, easy to dismantle. But getting to the command center wouldn't be easy. The stronghold was a fortress, surrounded by layers of defenses, and guarded by some of the fiercest warriors in the galaxy. They would have to sneak in, bypass the outer defenses, and get close enough to strike. As they neared the outskirts of the stronghold, the sound of enemy patrols grew louder. Lyra's enhanced senses detected the vibrations in the ground, the faint whir of mechanical devices in the distance. Chrysos' forces were everywhere. The sky above was filled with the constant hum of warships circling the fortress, their sleek forms cutting through the thick clouds like predators searching for prey. The air itself seemed charged with an electric tension, as though the very atmosphere was anticipating the clash of battle. Lyra could see the fear in the rebels' eyes. They were determined, but they were also outmatched. They had no army, no heavy weapons, just a handful of guerrilla fighters and the ancient technology she now wielded. And yet, as they crouched behind cover, preparing to move in closer, Lyra felt something within herself stir. She had the suit. She had the legacy of the ancient civilization, a power beyond anything the warlord's forces had. And now, with the rebels by her side, she felt that for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. "Stay close," she whispered to Kale, who nodded grimly, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. The group moved in silence, their steps light and deliberate. Lyra led them, moving with the grace and speed the suit afforded her. Each step was calculated, each decision precise. She could feel the power surging through her, and yet she knew that they had to remain undetected. The warlord's forces were numerous, and any mistake could cost them everything. As they reached the outer perimeter of the fortress, Lyra activated the suit's cloaking feature, causing her and the rebels to vanish from sight. The energy of the suit hummed around them, bending light and sound, making them nearly invisible. For a moment, they simply stood there, hidden in plain sight, as enemy patrols passed just a few meters away. It felt like an eternity before the patrols moved on. But eventually, the rebels began to move again, using the distraction to slip past the outer defenses. Lyra's heart raced, every nerve in her body alert. She could feel the presence of the enemy forces nearby, their soldiers waiting in the shadows, ready to pounce on any intruder. But for now, they were safe. The closer they got to the fortress, the more heavily fortified the area became. Guard towers rose above them, their eyes scanning the ground below with unblinking precision. Laser fences and force fields created an impenetrable wall of energy, designed to keep any would-be infiltrators out. Lyra's mind raced, her enhanced intellect analyzing every obstacle, every weak point in the fortress's defense systems. She paused for a moment, studying the layout of the defenses. The weak point was just ahead, a gap in the security grid where the field's power was slightly fluctuating. It was small, but it was enough. If they could get past it, they would be inside. "Follow me," Lyra whispered, and led the group toward the gap. The rebels moved swiftly, keeping low to the ground. As they reached the security grid, Lyra activated the suit's enhanced hacking abilities. The suit's internal systems connected to the fortress's security network, bypassing the first layer of encryption. Her fingers danced over the suit's interface, her mind fully engaged as she manipulated the energy fields. The glow from the grid flickered for a brief moment, then went dark, allowing them to pass through. They were in. The interior of the fortress was a maze of corridors and chambers, dimly lit by harsh, flickering lights. The walls were made of reinforced steel, and the air smelled of oil and metal. The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, and Lyra's heart beat faster. They were so close now. Every corner, every door could hide a deadly surprise. But she wasn't afraid. The suit made her feel invincible. They continued through the fortress, taking down guards silently when necessary. The rebels followed her lead, their movements becoming more confident with each success. But Lyra knew that the hardest part was still to come. The deeper they went, the closer they came to the central command hub, and Chrysos was waiting for them. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the heart of the stronghold, the command center. The door to the chamber was massive, reinforced with layers of energy shields and locking mechanisms. Lyra stepped forward, her hand hovering over the door's controls. Her mind raced as she hacked into the system, bypassing layer after layer of security. Sweat beaded on her forehead as the door's locking mechanism finally gave way with a loud clank. The door slid open. Inside, the room was filled with holoscreens and control panels, all displaying real-time information about the warlord's forces, the location of rebel cells, and the status of ongoing operations. At the center of the room was a massive holographic map of the planet, showing the warlord's territory in red, his armies encroaching on every side. But it was not the map that caught Lyra's attention. It was the figure standing at the far side of the room. Chrysos. The warlord stood tall and imposing, his armor a sleek black with gold trim, his helmet reflecting the light of the room. He turned slowly to face them, his cold eyes locking onto Lyra's. "So, you've come," Chrysos said, his voice deep and foreboding. "I've been waiting for you." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine, but she stood her ground. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. The end of the warlord's reign. "You don't belong here," Lyra said, her voice steady. "This planet is not yours to rule." Chrysos chuckled darkly. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a relic, a child playing with ancient toys. You don't understand the power you're dealing with." Lyra's hand tightened into a fist. "I understand more than you think, and I'm not alone." With a single command, the room filled with the sounds of approaching footsteps. More of Chrysos' soldiers, emerging from hidden alcoves, their weapons raised. But Lyra didn't hesitate. The suit responded instantly, its systems coming online in full force. Her body felt alive with power, the air around her crackling as she prepared for the fight of her life. Chrysos stepped forward, his expression cold, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew the battle was about to begin, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for the storm Lyra was about to unleash. "Let's finish this," Lyra said as she leaped into action. The battle for the future of the planet was about to unfold, and Lyra knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The reckoning. The room erupted into chaos. Chrysos' soldiers, fierce and relentless, poured into the command center, their weapons raised, eyes locked on Lyra. But she was already moving, faster than they could react. The ancient suit hummed with energy, its internal systems adapting to her every movement. As Lyra charged forward, time seemed to slow. She was a blur of motion, striking, dodging, and countering with an unnatural precision. A soldier lunged at her with a plasma blade, but Lyra sidestepped in an instant, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. The force of her movement sent him crashing into the control panel, sparks flying from the damaged equipment. Another soldier tried to fire at her from across the room, but Lyra was already airborne, her body propelled by the suit's enhanced agility. She spun mid-air, landing behind him with a swift and deadly strike. His weapon clattered to the ground as he collapsed. The rebels, though outnumbered, followed her lead, rushing into the fray with newfound courage. Kale was a blur of steel and fire, his cybernetic arm smashing through the ranks of soldiers, while the others used their agility and stealth to take down enemies silently. It was a symphony of violence, the rebels fighting with everything they had, their every movement flowing with Lyra's rhythm. But even with the suit's power, Lyra knew that they couldn't hold this position for long. Chrysos' soldiers were many, and more were arriving by the second. The longer they'd fought, the more likely it was that the warlord would take control of the battlefield once again. She had to end this. Lyra's eyes locked onto Chrysos, standing near the far wall, watching the battle unfold with a quiet intensity. The warlord hadn't moved. He wasn't a participant in this skirmish. He was waiting for something. And Lyra understood what that something was. He was waiting for the right moment to strike. But she wouldn't give him that moment. With a single thought, Lyra activated the suit's most powerful function, the energy cannons embedded in the shoulder plates. They powered up with a low hum, the energy building until it crackled in the air. She aimed at the ceiling, unleashing a concentrated blast that sent shockwaves rippling through the room. The ceiling cracked open, debris raining down on the soldiers, but they kept coming. The warlord's forces were relentless. Kale and the rebels pushed forward, clearing a path toward Chrysos. The battle was far from over, but they were getting closer. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, every step carrying her closer to the man who had destroyed so much. And then the warlord moved. Chrysos stepped forward, his imposing presence casting a shadow over the battlefield. His armor gleamed in the flickering light, and the faint hum of energy surrounded him as he activated his personal weapon, a massive energy sword that crackled with deadly power. His eyes glowed beneath his helmet, burning with the fire of a conqueror. He raised his sword, and the ground beneath him seemed to tremble in response. Lyra wasn't sure how, but she felt it. Chrysos was different from the others. He wasn't just a soldier or a warlord. He was a force of nature, a man whose very presence bent the battlefield to his will. She could feel the weight of his power, the immense gravity of his aura, pulling everything toward him. "We end this here," Chrysos said, his voice booming through the room, cold and menacing. Lyra steeled herself. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the confrontation that would decide the fate of the planet. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for freedom, for the future of every person who had been crushed beneath Chrysos' iron fist. Without hesitation, she lunged forward, activating the suit's thrusters to propel her toward him. Her fists were charged with energy, ready to meet the warlord's power head-on. Chrysos swung his sword with terrifying precision, the blade cutting through the air with a deadly roar. Lyra raised her arm just in time to block the blow, the suit absorbing the impact. She was thrown back, crashing into a nearby pillar, but she recovered almost immediately, rolling to her feet. The suit's enhanced durability had saved her, but she could feel the strain. Chrysos was stronger than she had anticipated. "Is that all?" Chrysos mocked, his voice dripping with disdain. He swung again, and this time, Lyra barely dodged in time. The blade tore through the air, grazing her side, and she winced as pain shot through her. The suit compensated, but the wound was real. "Not yet," Lyra snarled, her voice filled with resolve. She activated her suit's energy blade, a weapon that hummed with deadly power, and charged again. The two clashed in a flurry of motion, energy blades sparking, fists colliding with the sound of thunder. The battlefield around them seemed to fade into the background as they fought, their every move an explosion of raw power. Lyra's suit gave her speed, strength, and agility, but Chrysos matched her blow for blow, his every strike a display of brutal force. He was a warrior, a conqueror, and his experience in battle was evident. Lyra's breath was coming in heavy gasps, her body moving faster than her mind could keep up. She was starting to tire. Chrysos was relentless, and the longer this fight dragged on, the more she could feel her strength waning. The suit was powerful, but it wasn't invincible. And the warlord knew it. "You should have stayed hidden," Chrysos said, his voice low and filled with menace. "Now you will die like the others who dared challenge me." Lyra's eyes burned with fury. She wouldn't let that happen. She refused to let him win. With a sudden burst of energy, Lyra feinted to the left, then used the suit's thrusters to propel herself behind him. In one fluid motion, she slammed her energy blade into the back of Chrysos' armor, the blade cutting through his defenses with a surge of power. Sparks flew as the blade cut deep into the warlord's suit, but Chrysos didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he twisted, grabbing Lyra by the throat and lifting her off the ground. Her hands flew to his arm, trying to break free, but his grip was like iron. "Foolish girl," he growled. "You think you can defeat me. I am the future of this galaxy. I am the power you seek." Lyra's vision began to blur, her throat constricting, but something inside her, something deep and primal, snapped. The suit flared with a blinding light, energy surging through her veins like a tidal wave. She threw everything she had into one final desperate move. With a guttural roar, Lyra broke free from Chrysos' grasp, the power of the suit making her stronger than she ever thought possible. She twisted in midair, landing in front of him. The energy within her was boiling over, her entire being consumed by it. "This ends now," she whispered, her voice filled with fury. In a flash, she launched herself forward with the full force of the suit. Chrysos swung his energy sword at her, but she was faster. Lyra moved with lightning speed, her own blade cutting through the air in a perfect arc. Their weapons collided with a deafening crack, but Lyra didn't stop. She drove her blade deep into Chrysos' chest, right where the heart of his power lay. The warlord's eyes widened in shock, and for the first time, Lyra saw fear in them. "Impossible," Chrysos gasped, his grip on his sword faltering. With one final push, Lyra activated the suit's full power, and the blade exploded with energy, sending a shockwave through the command center. Chrysos let out a strangled cry as his body convulsed, his armor glowing hot with energy. And then, with one last breath, the warlord collapsed, his body crumbling into dust. Lyra stood over him, panting, her breath heavy and uneven. The battle was over. Chrysos was dead. But as the dust settled and the silence crept in, she couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the end? Or was it only the beginning of a new war? As the rebels gathered around her, their faces filled with awe and disbelief, Lyra knew one thing for certain. This planet's future was now in her hands, and she would fight to protect it, no matter the cost. The dawn of a new era. The silence that followed the warlord's fall was deafening. For a moment, the entire room seemed frozen in time, the air thick with the weight of what had just happened. Chrysos, the tyrant who had ruled this planet with an iron fist, was no more. His body lay in a heap, his once immense presence now reduced to nothing. The walls, the control panels, the rebel fighters, everything around Lyra seemed to blur, as though the very world was trying to make sense of the impossible event that had just transpired. Lyra stood amidst the wreckage, her body trembling from exhaustion, the ancient suit still humming with residual energy. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breathing ragged and uneven. The battle had been brutal, far more grueling than she could have ever imagined. But it was over. The warlord was gone, and with him, the iron grip he had held on this planet. The rebels, still in shock, slowly began to gather around her. Kale, his cybernetic arms scratched and bruised but unbroken, stepped forward first. His face was a mixture of disbelief and awe as he looked at the fallen tyrant. "We did it," Cale whispered, his voice filled with wonder. You did it." Lyra didn't answer at first. She could hardly believe it herself. For so long, she had been a soldier, trained to fight, to kill, to follow orders. But now, with the warlord defeated, it felt like she had just opened a door to a future she had never imagined. The weight of what had just happened hung heavy on her shoulders. There was no time to rest. There was no time to grieve. The war had ended, but the fight for the future was only just beginning. "Not yet," Lyra said, her voice low and determined. "We've only taken down one part of the enemy. The real battle starts now." She turned toward the holographic map on the wall, which was still displaying the warlord's strategic territories. Red lines marked the zones that had once been under his control, but there were still pockets of resistance, remnants of his followers scattered across the planet. Lyra knew that while Chrysos may have been the figurehead, his power wasn't solely dependent on him. There were still loyalists, mercenaries, and factions that would fight to retain the old regime. The true victory was not in defeating a single man, but in breaking the chains that bound the people to his rule. "Chrysos is dead," she said, her eyes locking with Cale's. "But the people still need us. We need to unite the survivors, rally the scattered resistance groups, and rebuild. If we don't act fast, someone else will rise to take his place." Cale nodded, his expression hardening. He understood the gravity of what Lyra was saying. The victory, while monumental, had also created a power vacuum. Whoever filled that vacuum could either bring peace or plunge the planet back into chaos. But Lyra was right. They had no time to lose. The rebellion wasn't just about revenge. It was about creating a new world, one where the people would be free to live without fear. Lyra looked over the rest of the rebels. They were battered, bruised, but they were alive, and they were free. There was no going back to the way things had been. The oppression, the fear, it was all over. Now they had to forge a new path, a new future. "We need to take the next steps carefully," she said, her voice growing more confident. "First, we spread the word of the warlord's death. His loyalists will try to regroup, but with him gone, they will be disorganized. The people will rise if they know there's hope." The rebels nodded in agreement, their faces lighting up with determination. They knew that the work ahead would be monumental. It wouldn't be easy to dismantle a regime that had ruled with such fear and brutality for so long. But now, they had the opportunity to do what many thought impossible. "What about the planet's leadership?" Cale asked, stepping closer. "Who leads now? Who makes the decisions?" Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of leadership settle on her. The power of the suit, the ancient technology, it had given her the strength to defeat Chrysos, but now it was time to build something new. The leader, a symbol, someone who could unite the people and guide them forward. But she knew that she couldn't do it alone. "I'm not the answer," Lyra said slowly, her voice firm but humble. "This planet needs a voice, someone who speaks for the people, not just for the warriors." Cale looked at her, a mix of respect and understanding in his eyes. "You've done more than anyone could have asked of you, but you're right. This world needs its own future, not one shaped by a single person. We need a council, a collective of leaders from every faction, every survivor, every corner of this world." Lyra nodded, feeling the weight lift off her chest. She knew Cale was right. The future of the planet would be shaped by many hands, not just hers. It wasn't about one person holding power. It was about the people coming together to rebuild and create something better. "We'll need to act fast," Lyra said, her voice steady and resolute. "We'll send out messengers to all the rebel factions, the survivors hiding in the corners of this world. We'll bring them together, and together, we'll decide what comes next. No more warlords, no more oppression. Only the people, united." As the rebels began to make preparations, Lyra took a moment to look around the room. The walls that had once been filled with the warlords' propaganda were now blank, as though the very air was cleansing itself of the darkness that had once held this place in its grip. The warlord's control was shattered. His influence was gone. But Lyra knew this victory wouldn't be the last. There would be struggles ahead. Old loyalties would die hard. There would be betrayals, hardships, and battles to fight. But for the first time in years, she felt the possibility of something greater on the horizon. "This is just the beginning," Lyra said, her eyes scanning the room, her voice carrying the weight of destiny. "Together, we will rebuild. We will make this planet a place where the people are free. And no one, not even the shadows of the past, will ever take that away from us." With those words, the rebels rallied around her. Kel stepped forward, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Then let's start," he said. "Let's give them the future they deserve." As the rebels left the command center to spread the word and begin the process of uniting the survivors, Lyra stood alone for a moment longer. Her mind raced with possibilities, with the daunting challenges ahead. But deep down, she felt a surge of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. The fight was far from over, but the warlord was gone, and the people were free. And now, it was time to build a world worth fighting for. The dawn of a new era had begun,